There is no wick left.
Thing went on again. What? Okay.
Don't worry about that one. Don't worry about that one.
We light our chalice this morning for wisdom from the world's legends which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life.
Good morning. I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in our first hymn, number 352 in the gray hymnal, Find a Stillness. The words will be projected on the wall. Love is the spirit of this church.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
It is time to gather, and I would like to invite all the youth, the young, and the young at heart to come forward and join me on the gathering quilt. So this month, our theme is talking about integrity and what it means to be a people of integrity. And sometimes it has to do with the actions that you do, and sometimes it's about the actions that other people do. So I have a story. Once upon a time, there was a queen sitting up on a balcony, eating rice cakes that she dipped in honey. And she was speaking with her highest advisor. And while she was talking, a bit of honey dripped onto the balcony railing. And the advisor says, "Do you want me to call a servant and take care of that honey that dripped on the railing?" And the queen says, "It's just a bit of honey. I'm not worried about it. Just let it go. Don't worry about it." So they continued on with their conversation, and it was a warm afternoon, the sun was beating down, and the honey warmed up enough that it dripped off the railing and down to the ground. Well, the advisor says to the queen, "Should I call a servant to take care of that? Because there's now a drop on the ground, too." The queen's like, "I don't care about a drop of honey on the ground. It's just honey, right?" "Yeah." Well, what happens is that the honey started gathering flies. And then with the flies there was a lizard that came out to get the flies. Well, as the lizard's darting around, the baker's cat sees the lizard, and the cat comes out and starts batting at the lizard. And then, the butcher's dog saw the cat. So the dog came out and started bothering the cat. Well, the advisor sees this and he goes, "Queen, should we do something about this? Because the lizard is going after the flies that went after the honey, and now the cat's going after the lizard, and the dog's going after the cat." The queen's like, "I don't care. Someone will see it. Don't worry about it. Someone else will take care of it." Well, in fact, someone else did see it. The baker saw it. The baker saw that her cat was being bothered by the dog. So she went out with her rolling pin and started chasing the dog away. Well, the butcher saw the baker out there, so the butcher went out there with his broom and started swatting at the cat. Well, after a while, suddenly the butcher and the baker were swatting at each other. One bit of honey, yes. Well, there's a bunch of shopkeepers in town, and there's some shopkeepers that kind of like the baker more, and there's some that kind of like the butcher more. So suddenly, the shopkeepers got into the tussle, and they took sides. Well, there's townspeople, and the townspeople like the baker more, the butcher more. So now some of the townspeople were tussling with the other, and there's rocks being thrown. Well, the soldiers came in. Well, some of the soldiers knew the butcher, and some of the soldiers knew the baker. So they took sides too. So all this is going on. All these people are fighting, and there's rocks being tossed. Someone threw a torch into one of the stores, and there's a fire. All this is going on. Finally, the queen and the advisor had to be escorted out of the castle because the castle caught on fire too.
How did the castle catch on fire?
There's wood in the castle. It's not all stone.
Yeah, but...
Someone threw a torch. So anyway, the queen stopped in the street underneath where her balcony had been, and she reached down and touched something in a small puddle on the ground. It's honey. I guess I should have cleaned up that drop of honey in the first place. Now my whole kingdom has been lost because of it. And that was the last day that the queen ever said, "It's not my problem." So today in class, we're talking about being true to yourself by finding and feeling the integrity of we. So has there ever been times where you've said, it's not my problem, let someone else take care of it? Yeah, Ben?
I think everyone here has, probably.
Everybody probably has?
Like, even if it's something like, that's like a bunch of paper on the floor and blah, blah, blah spot.
It's not my litter, it's not my litter, it's not my garbage.
Garbage.
Yep.
I'm just going to
Sophia?
let them take it.
Nothing? Okay.
Like that.
So there's also the times where in society where it might be other people are being affected, but you're not being affected. Do you think that should still be something that you might do something where it might not affect you directly, but you can be the ally or the friend of someone who it is affecting. Can you think of any examples of that, Sasha?
Someone's bullying your friend, and then you'll ask them to
Bystander. An
So
bystander.
if someone's bullying your friend, that you go stand up for them? Very good. Yes.
You can, you can do something unexpected.
Do something unexpected for someone? Yes. Anybody else? Anybody else have any ideas? Yes.
Raymond.
If your brother's playing with your toy, you walk away.
If someone does what?
If somebody's playing your toy, then you have to walk away.
You don't.
So if someone is playing with your toys, let them use it. You can walk away and let them use your toys, and that's not a
Find
problem.
something
You're not
else to
gonna.
do. Don't just freak out. Yeah!
Yes. Other things that you can do is you can maybe protest. So some things that we may hear about in history is from Martin Luther King. He liked to protest, but he didn't want to yell or he didn't want to fight. He wanted to just speak and do it in a friendly way. So with that, there was a lot of allies that went and helped him. There is a Unitarian Universalist minister named James Reeb who came down and he went and he wanted to help with the civil rights. So even though James Reeb was a white person, he still felt that it was his responsibility to help with the civil rights of the African Americans and people of color. So as a people of integrity, it's not just about ourselves, it's about helping others also. Please stand in body or spirit as we sing hymn number 413, Go Now in Peace. The kids and I will leave for religious education class after the first verse.
Once a month, this congregation takes a special collection to support a project or a local organization that aligns with our values. Today's special collection is to benefit the Smile Project of the DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church. To tell you about that, we have Cheryl Clayton and David Stevens.
Mine's going to take a little while. You want to sit down for a second? Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Cheryl Clayton here again, this time for SMILE. That's students, mentors, internships with local employers. Always a challenge to follow Russ Manthe anytime on any topic. Last month, he spoke to you about PADS. PADS is an important program, very beneficial for the recipients and the volunteers. Part of our difficulty here in our amazingly beautiful, expensive sanctuary is that there are many different directions our energies, our talents, and our money could go to help alleviate suffering, to encourage justice, equity, and indeed living our value of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So many problems to solve, so much passion in diverse directions. If you aren't feeling stretched thin by the number of hands reaching out to you for help and money, then you haven't been paying attention or reading your email. While celebrating the birthday of Dr. King, Reverend Mike reminded us last week that we will not solve the problems of the world if we never look beyond our own provincial concerns. It is not enough to sit in complacency and comfort if our fellow human beings live under oppression and people of color are still treated as second-class citizens. We need to join hands with a great many other people. Change doesn't come without many people working together to make that change. Naperville has had its share of the headlines lately. This week, over 700 ninth graders at Naperville Central High School were treated to a visit from 3 well-known black civil rights activists. Thomas Armstrong was one of those. His book, Autobiography of a Freedom Rider, My Life as a Foot Soldier for Civil Rights, was published in 2011. He grew up in Mississippi. He was part of early protests for voting rights and equal public accommodations, resulting in threats that had him running for his life. He now lives in Naperville. Those 700 freshmen would not have been surprised if they had been told of lynchings or Ku Klux Klan, maybe even Jim Crow, perhaps even back of the bus and colored water fountains. Mr. Armstrong reminded them of other disrespectful, demeaning experiences, expectations of Negroes by the white culture of the 60s. He said, for instance, if a black person wanted to buy a pair of shoes, he was to draw an outline of his foot, and the clerk would take the drawing and select shoes from the stockroom that might or might not fit the customer. Black shoppers for clothing were not allowed to try on clothing before making a purchase. They just bought something they thought might fit, took the clothing home to see if they liked it. Perhaps we no longer go to these extremes, but in Naperville these days, a customer at a local Buffalo Wild Wings can ask that black patrons be told to move to another area of the establishment because he didn't want to sit next to black people. You may have heard of the young black teenager who was offered for sale as a slave on Craigslist for $1. I met this young man a few weeks ago. What struck me about him was his awareness that the white youth who played the joke could have been charged with a hate crime. The young black teenager insisted that he did not want the white youth to have his life ruined by a felony charge because of a momentary lapse in judgment. I was impressed. The point, racism is still damaging people's lives. With our willingness to support the SMILE program, we are making a positive impact on not only the 30 students who have participated in the last 2 summers, but also 25 to 30 more we hope to sponsor in 2020. Add them to the extended families of these 60 students, and the employees of 16 to 20 businesses who provide mentoring to these high school students, we are making a difference. And as Russ Manthe said last month, these efforts cost money. We have been handing out free will donation cards to some of you because we would love to have your financial backing. And in case you would like to make your contribution later in the spring rather than today, you can let us know your intention by filling out a card. Return the card to me or Ken Korish, or place it in the social justice mailbox in the church office. As for Russ Manthe, I don't remember much of what he said last month, but I do remember his demonstration of the $5, $10, and $20 bills that he was flashing from his inside coat pocket to illustrate the types of currency you could drop into the offering bowl in support of pads. A very clever gimmick, I thought. I hope many of you gave generously that day. Examples of injustice are numerous, and money is not the only answer, but it can sometimes contribute to solutions. Smile would be just as pleased to receive some of those same bills, too. And in case you have any 50s or 100s on you, we can take those as well. Writing a check, just put Smile on the memo line. And remember to bring me your copy of the winter issue of UU World if you still have it and don't want to keep it. It's the winter issue, the one that looks like this. I still want to give some of these out to some of the students and mentors that are in the program. So if you have yours, please bring it in. Just put it on the social justice table by the office door. Now, David Stevens, one of our mentors, will share a few thoughts with you. Thank you.
Well, how do I follow that? I was hoping to go first. Well, good morning. I'm David Guy Stevens, and my family and I officially became members of this congregation on April 14th, 2019. Well, thank you. But I'm here to talk about the SMILE project, but I mention that for a reason. Over the last couple years, you've heard a lot about the SMILE project, about the students it has helped, the awards it has won, and Cheryl talked eloquently about those things and its need for support. It's a terrific opportunity for students to be introduced to the workforce. It can teach them the rigors of work, prepare them for the rigors of work, as well as possibly open doors for future career paths. If you want to be a lawyer, if you want to be a dentist, or whatever. It can introduce you to people in the community. It could prepare you for what to expect. But at minimum, it's great on a resume. So it's very beneficial. But I would like to tell you about what the SMILE project meant to me and means to me personally. The SMILE project was the first connection I had to this church. Miriam and I came to Activist Expo in 2017, and it was being held in this church. It was the first time I ever been here. And we were walking around, and there were tables set up. And there was a table set up to promote the idea of the SMILE project. That's when I first met Stephanie Hughes, who, by the way, through another terrific program, the Diversity Dinners, Miriam and I have gotten to know very well and consider Stephanie and Duncan very good friends now. But we're talking about the SMILE project. Stephanie tells me they're looking for people to help develop the SMILE project, a mentoring program. They're also looking for business owners to take on interns. I was immediately on board. So I began attending meetings, helping out however I could, in whatever way. And my family and I started attending Sundays here at the DUUC. it was a perfect fit for us because I was raised Christian, my wife was raised Muslim. We had 2 children and we were looking for something. And I guess a little bit through the Smile Project and mostly through the wonderful people we met here, we found it. So over the last 2 years, as a business owner, I've had the pleasure of meeting some fine young people, and they've helped me, much needed help I might add, in my law firm. And all I had to do was exchange or give some wisdom, I guess. That's a great deal for me. So that couldn't have been possible for the students and for the business owners if it wasn't for this congregation's generosity, I guess, and support. So please support the Smile Project, because just by me standing here, I'm proof that it has far-reaching and sometimes unintended benefits to the people this project touches. So, thank you.
As we prepare to take the special collection for the Smile Project, I offer these words from Theodore Parker. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. And its profession of faith, divine living. The collection for the support of the Smile Project will now be given and received.
Both of the pieces today, the choir pieces that is, are rather meditative in nature. So I don't think you're going to be humming any of the melodies on your way out. Very nicely done there, Vera, playing the chimes. So this next piece, From the State of Emptiness, I just want to say a few words about. The composer of the piece says that she, From the State of Emptiness, blends my memories of Tibetan monks chanting, heard during my travels in the East, with the melodic shape and texture of Western chant. In weaving these two styles together, my intention was not to emulate any one style of sacred music, but to bring my own sacred experience to the creation of new music. From the State of Emptiness uses the techniques of harmonic singing and harmonic humming, in addition to words. This sound is meant to be both a reflection and symbiosis of the dung chen, a long trumpet-like instrument, and Tibetan sacred chanting. So you'll hear when people are humming, you may be hearing other sounds at the same time. Many of you already know the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, but she explains that this common mantra inscribed on rocks, musical instruments, prayer flags, and prayer wheels in Tibet cannot be easily translated, and yet is said to contain the entire teachings of the Buddha. From the State of Emptiness.
Thank you, choir. This morning, I'd like to spend some time thinking about teachings from Buddhism as part of our monthly worship theme about integrity. It has always seemed to me that integrity and self-awareness are hallmarks of the mindfulness tradition of Buddhism. Consider the concept of dukkha, a basic Buddhist teaching often translated as life is suffering. This is not as bleak as it sounds. Although I will talk of some bleak aspects of life today, I will bring us back around to the sunshine by the time we are done. And hopefully that sunshine will be out there by the time we leave. It was cold this morning. Anyway, in fact, I'd love to share with you the story of one of the most enduring symbols of Buddhism, the lotus flower. Have you ever seen a lotus growing in its natural habitat? If you have, you are likely up to your knees in muck. You see, the lotus is a swamp flower. It is rooted in the mud underwater, and the stalk of the flower must reach up through the mud and up through the water. It is seeking, reaching for sunlight. And when the stalk has grown and reached the surface of the water of the swamp, then the flower can bud and bloom. Here in this dismal environment is this thing of beauty that arose out of the mud and opened its petals to the sunshine. And so, if a Buddhist is speaking of life as suffering, they are speaking about one's life being rooted in the muck and mud, deep underwater, far from the rays of sun. Life is the struggle to send that shoot to the surface so that it can bloom, so that life can bloom into its full glory. And so it was with tongue-in-cheek that I settled on a pun for the title of today's sermon, Stepping in the Dukkha. Sorry. When we are talking about rising out of the muck. Before I go on, we should define two terms I'm going to be using today, both of which come from the ancient languages of India. The first is dukkha, and the second is ahimsa. The Berry Center for Buddhist Teachings defines dukkha in this way. No single English word adequately captures the full depth, range, and subtlety of the crucial Pali term dukkha. Over the years, many translations of the word have been used: stress, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, etc. Each has its own merits in a given context. There is value in not letting oneself get too comfortable with any one particular translation of the word, since the entire thrust of Buddhist practice is the broadening and deepening of one's understanding of dukkha until its roots are finally exposed and eradicated once and for all. One helpful rule of thumb: as soon as you think you've found the single best translation for the word, think again. For no matter how you describe dukkha, it's always deeper, subtler, and more unsatisfactory. Well, that's a cheery thought. As you may know, the foundational teaching of Buddhism is often expressed in English in this way, that life exists in a default state of suffering, and that it is our work to bring about the end of suffering. This is often presumed to be in the context of one's own singular life, but I've always felt that was a little self-centered. So we will also consider how we may address suffering in the lives of others as well as ourselves. The second term I need to define is ahimsa. This quote from the Metta Center helped me get a better grasp of the concept made famous by a leader for independence through nonviolent means in India, Mahatma Gandhi, and further expounded upon by one who was inspired by Gandhi and who we're celebrating tomorrow, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Describing ahimsa, the Metta Center teaches, ahimsa is the ancient Sanskrit term, usually translated as and possibly the model for nonviolence. The translation is unfortunate, however, and then in that such negative compounds in Sanskrit were more positive in effect than the corresponding literal translations in English. Ahimsa should actually be translated something like the force unleashed when desire to harm is eradicated. Of course, nonviolence is handier, and that's fine as long as we realize its limitations. They go on to describe the work of Gandhi as related to this principle. Ahimsa is derived from the Sanskrit root san, which means to kill. The form hims means desirous to kill. The prefix a is a negation. So ahimsa means literally lacking any desire to kill, which is perhaps the central theme upon which Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist morality is built. It is, as Gandhi puts it, the very essence of human nature. They quote Gandhi, "Nonviolence is the law of our species, as violence is the law of the brutes. The spirit lies dormant in the brute, and he knows no law but that of physical might. The dignity of man requires obedience to a higher law, to the strength of the spirit." The word nonviolence connotes a negative, almost passive condition, whereas the Sanskrit term ahimsa suggests a dynamic state of mind in which power is released. Strength, Gandhi said, does not come from physical capacity, it comes from an indomitable will. Therein he found his own strength, and there he exhorted others to look for theirs. Latent in the depths of human consciousness, this inner strength can be cultivated by the observance of complete ahimsa. So now that we've defined these concepts, let's move on to how they can affect our lives. Buddhist philosophy posits what they call four noble truths, which are the truth of dukkha, suffering, anxiety, unsatisfactoriness; the truth of the origin of dukkha, which can be found in our pasts; the truth of the cessation of dukkha, which we hope to find in our futures; and the truth of the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. Clearly, this dukkha concept looms large in this worldview. The first aspect regards suffering, pain, anxiety, unsatisfactoriness with the status quo of life. They go further to point out that birth itself is a time of great pain, and yet it is a time of becoming and being, coming forth into a new life. Likewise, they teach that life is, by definition, a time of suffering, and yet it is also a time of becoming and being. Coming forth into a new life, we should take the steps to make it so. Finally, it is taught that death is a time, perhaps of pain, perhaps of suffering, perhaps the anticipation of which is full of anxiety, and yet it is also a time of becoming and being, coming forth into perhaps a new life, that is, some new state of existence, whatever that may be. Whatever dukkha may have come at the time of each of our births, or whatever dukkha may come at the time of each of our deaths, we have no control. One of the precepts of Buddhism is called right view, and is about accepting that which is, or an objective reality over which we have no personal control. There's a different way to put this that you might have heard. Reinhold Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer also describes this principle. I've spoken it here before, but I wish to share the short version of it again now. And it goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We've been looking at dukkha as suffering or pain, which may be mental, emotional, or physical. However, the Serenity Prayer suggests to us what may be a root cause of suffering in life, and that is failing to recognize that life exists in a constant and perpetual state of impermanence and change. And one aspect of our suffering is our attachment to something that is changing, which we cannot prevent. It seems to me that the greatest disappointment in a person's life could very well be railing against that thing that occurred, whatever it may be, over which we as mere humans have no control whatsoever. One of the early stories of the Buddha talks about him as a young man before his enlightenment, in which he came face to face with disease for the first time. It's helpful to recall that as a prince, the young man that became Buddha had led a very sheltered life in his father's palace and had never seen poverty or hunger, sickness or death until, as a young man, he went out walking on his own and saw it for the first time. The Buddha was later to teach his students that sickness is a cause for suffering, so why would one wish to magnify that suffering by refusing to accept the reality of what is? The person so afflicted has no control over the affliction, and spending one's entire energy in denying this objective reality only makes the suffering even worse. There are many things that happen in life, not just some sort of sickness, that are beyond our control. Kicking the tire does not make the broken down car run any better, and it turns out that crying cannot rescue the spilt milk. The final aspect of dukkha will also take us into a discussion of ahimsa. In Buddhist teachings, the right view includes that all phenomena are connected, that they all originate from the same point, that all beings arose from the same primordial soup, if you will, and so we are all connected. The concepts of separateness and an independent self is an illusion in this teaching. We address this by seeking clarity above all, by removing the veil before one's eyes, seeing through the illusion of separate selfhood. In Unitarian Universalism, we frequently speak of the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Buddhism views interdependency as the very foundation of all existence. Dukkha, related to interdependency, centers on a human tendency to consider the self as separate from the rest of existence, and that adhering to this illusion causes suffering in our lives and perhaps in the lives of others. When we wake our senses, as we sometimes sing, when we wake our senses, when we really pay attention to life, we realize that we are connected, you and I, and to all others. If someone out there is suffering, so are you and I. Although I do not know the answer to this great problem, I've watched the news with a sinking feeling in my gut as death tolls rises from epidemics around the world, as entire continents seem to be on fire, as so many things going wrong that we would like to change. And now it would be easy for me, a white middle-class male living in a first world country, to just disregard that suffering. That would be a mistake on my part, because another person's suffering affects, I'm going to say this, another person's suffering affects my soul. But that may be too big of a problem for us to really tackle today, so why don't we pick a smaller one? Let's say that by some manner of careless word or deed, I have caused suffering for another person. This is something that anyone can do, has done, because we are human. Humans make mistakes. But realizing that brings me to a remembrance of the concept of ahimsa, of nonviolence, but more than that, ahimsa is the power to do good and to bring love into the lives of others. And this is the response that I wish to convey. Ahimsa is so much more than a passive principle of nonviolence. It is an active principle of love in action, or as Albert Schweitzer put it, reverence for life. When one has, as I have many times before, stepped in the dukkha, when one has caused any sort of pain, hurt, or suffering in the life of another, then one is called to try and put it right for that other person as well as for oneself. It's not always clear how that may be done. And one person's opinion of what needs to be done may be quite different than another's. But I'm reminded that no one knows what is in your heart but you, yourself, and no one knows what is in my heart but me. So one must find a way that rings true for oneself, to put love into action as a way of alleviating the suffering of another. For me, that has at times been reaching out to another person and directly addressing the dukkha I caused and making amends. At other times, it was after many attempts to reach out, much soul-searching and consultation with others, that I realized that the other person may not hear me in the way I wish to be heard, that they cannot see what is in my heart. And coming to the painful realization that the best way I can relieve that person's suffering is to step back and say no more until they are ready to speak to me. Ahimsa is difficult, as both Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King tried to teach humanity. Like every spiritual practice, when I realize that I've stepped off the path, the best thing I can do is stop, contemplate where I am and what I'm doing, and then try to step back onto the path. And that is the best advice I can give to you too. If you lose your way, stop and look around, and make your way back to where you need to be. We all get bruises along the way, but that is how we learn. And if we accept them, rather than doing all we can to avoid them, I think we will be happier for it in the end. Instead of my usual closing, I will leave you with this Buddhist benediction, Namaste. I honor the divine in you. Namaste to one and all. Our closing hymn is filled with loving kindness. It is in the Teal Hymnal 1031. You're invited to rise in body or in spirit. We are each the rootstock of the lotus plant, rooted in the detritus and messiness of life deep below the surface of the water. We are each the tender shoot of the lotus, growing up through mud and murkiness, reaching for the glorious sunshine. We are each the lotus flower bud, awaiting the moment of becoming, opening into a bloom of perfect beauty. We are each the lotus flower, overcoming adversity and suffering and helping others to do the same. May it ever be so, and blessed be you all. Go now in peace.